Promina?
Yes, hi.
Hi, I can't see you, but welcome to Sunday Sessions.
Hi, thank you for having me on today.
Okay, I see you now. So obviously people who are joining us in this conversation already know you, but
They do.
yeah, and that's why they're here, right? But like I always do, I'm still going to read out an introduction for you, so that
Okay.
those of you who do not haven't done enough research on you know who you are. So Promina Shrestha is an illustrator, comics artist, and visual art researcher based in Nepal. She is an alumni of Creating Heroines Project under the British Council, manager and artist with Virangana Comics anthology, and manages an anthropological graphic novel, Batoghato, Himalayan Lives and Landscapes, and the Roads That Changed Them by Dr. Stacy L Pigg, Simon Fraser
Yes.
University. Her research interests include contemporary art forms in Nepal and children's book illustrations and their impact on formative identities. Um, there's definitely a longer introduction to you, but we're keeping it at that for now. Thank you for joining us, Promina, on behalf of the Sunday Sessions team. Um, so there was this question playing on my mind this morning when I was thinking about our interview. So, whenever I've looked at a comic or uh, a graphic novel, I've always wondered, like, does the artist already have the entire story in mind and then sits down to draw it, or is the narrative sometimes guided by the drawings? How does it work?
In my context, I would say I usually have a visual idea. I start drawing something and then an idea clicks. Sometimes it's also it's very different, I think. So it depends on what kind of stories you write. So for example, like the Kali stories that I've been doing, my own stories, and then the Etietis, they are actually guided by images. So I just started drawing something and then idea clicked, and then, it went from there. Like it took a lot of research. So um, like building the story around an image took, like, for like Kali, for example, started with like just doing greeting cards, and then suddenly I wanted to create a story about it. It took me 5 years to get there. Whereas Eti also started like just a fun drawing, and then 2 years like develop the characters and everything. But sometimes there is also when you have for example, I myself might write something, but usually I need the aid of somebody else writing, because I'm actually not a good writer. I'm more visually very well. So then, for example, like Professor Stacy or the authors I have worked with, like Kalpana Pwara, Julie, they create the text and then the images happen.
You kept mentioning Kali in the last couple of minutes. I find a Kali very cute and playful. I feel like
Okay.
I've never seen a Kali who looks like that, and I just love her. So I'm just wondering, where did she originate in your mind? Was this a collaborative effort, or is she somebody who's been within you for a long time?
So what happened was, like, my dad is he doesn't worship. I mean, he follows Kali, and since I was small, he has shown me all these not shown, he's told me stories about like Kali and other religious icons. So I have had an interest, and then I went to KU, and there were these courses on ancient Nepal, the histories of like the sculptures we had and everything, and I got really keen on it. And I also went to Lok Chitrakar to learn how to make traditional Newari art. We call it Powa or Thangka in Tibetan. And he used to describe like the iconography, what different symbols mean, and so forth and so forth. And then what happened was, so I went to do my master's in JNU in arts and aesthetics, which is basically art, cinema, and theater history. And my main focus was art. And we had this professor who used to teach us for at least 1 year. I did iconography in Hinduism, Buddhism, some Jain, and Christianity, touched upon some of those aspects. So when we did it in Hinduism, one of my papers was actually on Kali, because I was so inspired by her, because I read the Devi Mahatmya, and then how she came to be like pure female energy. So like how Durga became was created out of the different aspects of the deities, so she could fight the demons, and then Durga herself couldn't fight Chanda and Munda, and then suddenly, you know, out of herself she creates this her own female energy. She created Kali, and when you read descriptions of Kali or you look at drawings of Kali, she's always this ugly and, you know, like scary looking figure, and there's this whole narrative behind her. Then what happened was I used to doodle in class. So when I used to doodle in class, I used to doodle Kali as well in my imagination. So there's this whole range of different Kalis I created, you know, like how they described her in literature and iconography. And then finally, when I finished my master's degree, I came back to Nepal, and for a few months I did not know what to do. And it was Dasaiko Belama, and the first image I did was Durga on the line with the flying kite and the Mahishasur in the background. And I created Kali as well. I wanted to make Kali the more fun-loving, because like out of all the characters, her description always sounds so different from all the other nine
morbid.
gods. It's not exactly morbid, but then I thought maybe her morbidity is the fact that she might be different. That's why people find her morbid, like in society.
Because I think there's a description of how she lived in the Ghats, right? Lives in the Ghats. So I think, I don't know, I just thought that was sort of morbid, but it doesn't have to be.
So then what happened was, like, I created that Kali, and then I was just doodling her constantly, because for me she was like somebody I want to illustrate and make very happening, like, you know, not very happening, but like she's not ugly. She's this beautiful deity who sometimes is misunderstood by her, like you said, descriptions are morbid, but the fact is, like, maybe they're morbid because, like I mentioned before, maybe other deities just didn't understand her individuality or, you know, independence. Like she came from female energy. So then the story started growing, and at first I wanted to do hamro tyo what's it called, Kumariko story, relating it to Kali, but then it went further and further, and I kept developing. I tried to work with a friend of mine, but then it didn't work out exactly because it wasn't what I was looking for, because I wanted to make an interesting story, which I'm actually working on, about transculturality and feminist ideas, feminine energies. So yeah, so hopefully I can take out a chapter or two by January. So yeah, so actually it's also like a reflection of myself in a sense.
I think I sort of read that into it when I first saw your Kali image. But like for me personally, I've also been very interested in Kali because my grandmother was a fan, you know, and is your video showing? Oh, okay. I just received a notification about. Did you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I think there isn't a glitch right now, but I did lose your audio some time ago. So I felt like you must have said something then, which I did want to talk about, and I sort of lost it. But I'm going to come back to that because I've also been wondering, like, when is the time that you really started drawing, or when you thought, okay, this is what I want to do? Did it begin very early for you?
I think I always used to draw. I remember my mom giving me a sketchbook. And then I think I was 6, and I remember my first drawing was a UFO, and I used to always draw. I don't know why I drew a UFO. And then what happened was, I think later on in towards high school, I mean like 8th, 9th grade, I started drawing more and more. I made these comics about myself based on Archie's, like, oh yeah, my school life is also like Archie's, because that's what was
character
available.
were you?
Well, I used to call myself Josephine from Little Women, because I hated my name back then.
I think that one character has been an influence on so many women artists, right?
Yes. So then what happened is I used to hate my name, so I used to create this character and imagine it's like, oh, you know, we are like in high school.
You hated your name.
I used to hate my name.
I still hate mine. So why did you hate your name?
I have no idea why I hated my name. I couldn't, like, people could not pronounce it properly. It was always like Pramila, Promona. It was never Promina. Like, it's
Okay.
such a beautiful name. And I think I grew out of that when I went to high school, I guess, after my 11s, because then I was like, it's actually a gorgeous name and I don't want to change it. Before that, I was like, oh, I want to change my name. But then it was like,
But
so
before
yeah,
that, you did try to create characters that carried another name for you.
yeah. So, and it was weird. And then it took me quite some time to start developing this thing about that I can draw. So like, I mean, I wanted to be a painter and be the next Van Gogh in class 8 and everything. But I also was into sciences. So like I studied microbiology and I actually like biology a lot. And even now I'm fascinated with space and I follow like all those things that happens in the news. So ultimately, when I did my bachelor's, when I started doing my bachelor's, my sister got independence. Like she was independent and working by the age of 15. So I was like, I also want to do that. So by the time I finished high school, I was like, I'm going to find myself a job. I'm also going to be independent. So then what happened was I was studying in Trichandra College. So I was doing microbiology and I made this portfolio. I shared one of few images on my Instagram as well, where I was like, I did not know anything about art. I never studied art. So I was like, this is what a portfolio maybe should look like. And I just went around trying my luck and finally ended up with Wave in 2003. And since then I've been working as an artist.
Is creating art cathartic for you? Like for a lot of writers, writers talk about how writing is cathartic. So I just wonder, does art do that for you?
Before, yes, I used to use it as a form of catharsis, like for emotions or thoughts I had, or so. And even now, sometimes I do it. But now I find it like this is something that I also learned from Lok sir, is it can be a form of meditation when you think and you're calming yourself, or you like literally you think about things and you enjoy it. It's basically like this very effective energy. It's a good energy that comes out of drawing and creating work, especially when it's your own.
So I'm not very admittedly not very familiar with how artists work. So can you tell us, like, how does the process of creating art work for you? Like, do you work like just any time of the day, or do you have a certain discipline where you sit down and do your work? Because you
Lately
do
I've been
commission work, but you also do your own, right?
yeah, so commission work comes always as a priority. I do have to feed myself and pay my rent and everything, so it becomes a priority. Without that, completely unable to survive. But so when it's commission work, I try to stick to a routine. I try to like do it on time. Mostly I'm on time with my commissioned works. But when I do my own work, I need free time, like a few days of free time, because it's a lengthy process. I cannot like focus for 1 hour on my project and then suddenly go and do another work. I have to like complete a piece of work within like one go. So then when it comes to my own work, it's like, then it becomes a routine. Like I do it in the afternoons, in the evenings, I'll do some reading or some researching, or, get more ideas. So yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask you this earlier, but completely slipped my mind when you were talking about names. Do people ever confuse you with Promina Shrestha, because you're both artists today? But your work is really different, of course.
So Prina, so I used to create this thing called Harkedai, and then Prina Shrestha came actually after me. So a lot of my friends thought that it was me, and I was like, no, it's not. There's somebody else who's creating comics, and she's fantastic. And actually, I think we've become friends now. So
Yeah. For me, like, I feel like one of the first, how do I put this? I felt like I sort of started turning my attention to art by women in Nepal, like as a direct recipient because of Prina's work, because she used to publish on Republica, and I felt like that was one of the first things that really caught my eye. And of course, I think Kanchan Buratoki was working around the same time, and there were so many others, but it just that it was easier for me to have access to what Prina was doing because she was out there in the newspapers. I just feel like it's so rare to really have access to work done by women in Nepal. And of course, I read your paper on women artists in Nepal as well. So can we go a little bit into like how does it really work for women to be artists in Nepal? Because you know how in many professions we talk about how um, people pay less attention to you just because you're a woman, regardless of what work you're creating. Um, would you like to sort of take us a bit through, like how does it work for Nepali artists who are
Um,
women?
I cannot comment for all Nepali artist women. I can comment as an illustrator and a comic artist.
Mm.
Right now in the present, there is a lot of work for artists who are women, especially like there is an encouragement that, you know, their works are preferred and all that stuff. Generally, as an artist, it's quite difficult to get out there. You have to be like, when I started off, it was word to mouth. There was no Instagram, no Facebook, no nothing. So it was really word to mouth and knowing people. And now it's become like, if you're an artist, like if your work is great, you get approached or somebody recommends you. Like for instance, when there are commissioned works or somebody is looking for a graphic artist or a muralist or illustrator, I always tend to recommend people
Mhm.
other than myself, because like, as I said, I want to focus on my own work as well. But what happens is, I don't know how to answer this question exactly, but as comic artists, it becomes a bit difficult. You don't get taken seriously, especially since we are, if you've read my paper, we are illustrating our own little worlds and our own little bubbles, which my mainstream media is not very keen on just yet. They're still into like caricatures and political comics, satire and stuff like that.
Do you think, Promina, do you think it's also because so this bulk of art that's being produced by um uh, I don't want to say by, but do you think it's because the mainstream media is also viewing this as work produced by urban Nepali women? Or is there like do you think it's been
Well,
bracketed like that?
well, I think if you're not an urban person, then your work gets even less produced. It doesn't matter
Mm,
whether you're a female or a male, because like,
mm,
where is the center of media? So that becomes also problematic. And it's also in regards, like when we do produce work, it's not just for women, but it's also like for men, I believe.
mm,
Like my fellow colleagues, a few friends of mine also struggle with payments. People are not willing to pay us. They think that, you know, if they give us a bulk of work, it can be done within a day or two, when it actually takes maybe a month or it takes weeks to
mm,
do original work. So generally, like right now, like for instance, children's illustration has really taken a skydive let's say in Nepal, because there's a lot of
mm,
interest to produce literature for kids, so that like they can read more. And then comics is also taking up a rise, because, you know, people are seeing how comics and narratives can work. And other artists, I believe there's also a lot of work that's happening, like for example street arts and all that stuff. But I think as a female artist, yes, sometimes people don't tend to take you seriously. It's something that I mean, I don't know about others, I can only talk from my own experience, is that sometimes as a woman, or especially if you are like look young and silly and ridiculous like me, people just don't take you
it
seriously. They
helps to
think
have
you're
gray hair.
exaggerating. Maybe that's why I colored my hair, is like, I'm old, look at me. But it doesn't work. So yeah.
No. Um, I was also wondering because I was reading your paper, on this, and so you talk about how artists like Preena Kanchan, they've also and other artists who came before them, they also sort of infuse the domestic part of their lives in their art, right? And in a way, that's also making a political statement. And if we look at the history of women writers or artists, we see that this has always been part of the work they were producing, right? But do you think that's one of the reasons why work done by women sort of gets sidelined because it's viewed as something that's connected more to domesticity and not as something that's political, whereas the truth is anything personal is also political, right? What do you think about that?
I mean, I agree with you that the personal is also political. It's a personal perspective of history or what is
Mm,
happening, like. And I think, in a sense, I do believe that, I mean, a recent example is like the citizenship law or rights for women in Nepal is like, it's not exactly the forefront. We are still seen as second-class citizens, and we do not encompass all of Nepali women. We do not, we just don't see it as, I mean, we say it's a priority and we have a lot of work that's being done for women, but then at the same time, it's घरेलु कुरा तपाईले भने जस्तै, it's just domesticity. But the fun thing is that yes, most of the comic artists have had an urban experience, whether it's in Kathmandu or Pokhara or somewhere else, and their stories are very urban. However, I'm hopeful that more stories will come out with it. And like we're doing it through Virangana, we're trying to show that other stories are also important. Other stories can also show issues that you have to address. And yeah, but as women, it's a bit difficult. It's quite politically and socially charged. So it's like, I don't really want to comment on it.
How about where you live? Like, do you think where you live, like the place can, I don't know, impact what you're producing as an artist?
It can impact what we produce. I mean, for instance, like many women artists that I also know from abroad, even comic artists and illustrators, complain about the same things, like, not being taken seriously and there's not enough money in it and so forth and so forth. And big publications don't always want to take you on. It's a rarity. But I think that liberty of what we produce can vary from place to place. So yeah. So for example, when we started Virangana, me, Promina Shrestha, and a few other artists, we decided to do on self-love. And then there was this whole process that we met few times and we had these conversations about how culturally, as young women, as young girls, we are not actually taught to take care of ourselves. It's always like, oh, you have to learn to cook for, your future family, or you have to do this. And it's never like, you have to take care of yourself, then you can take care of others. There's that lacking in it. So a lot of people actually associated with the comic, like a lot of people like the different stories that came out of it.
I did.
So yeah.
I want to talk more about that a bit later in due course of our interview, in terms of like how you've collaborated with other women on this. I feel like I've seen a lot of work done around children's literature in the last, shall I say, a decade or so, or maybe even less. But what do you think was happening before that? Because and with this, I'm trying to sort of take you into your paper where you talk about Nepali-ness and Nepali-pun, and how and the politics, around how children's literature was used to impose this Nepali-ness by the state, right? Would you like to walk us through that, and how art can actually be also used as, may I call it propaganda? I don't know.
Well, in a sense, it is a propaganda, because even like with feminism, Nepali feminism, and our national identity, wearing the taka topi and all, it's about unifying the people in one. So even with children, like all the illustrations you used to see and all the illustrations that were encouraged were based on village life, or, having a taka topi and like, women who are farming rather than, so a lot of, yeah, so a lot of the things used to be like, even if it's written within the city, like when children's illustration started in Nepal, like story writing, there's this whole history to it. So before narratives, you were told word to mouth, and stories were told like during sitting and all that stuff. So when children's literature started, some of the artists that started all these illustrations, they also worked with like USAID and all the stuff, who started our education system. So they worked with like British personas and foreign people, basically, who guide them to create these illustrations, because when a child is studying Nepali in school, they should look and be like, oh, that's a Nepali person. It's not a German, it's not a Russian, it's a Nepali person. So that's how the idea actually started rolling off. And Professor Stacy also wrote a paper about identities based on development. So like you have like the foreigner, then you have the development agency workers, and then you'll have the village people. So illustrations also developed like that in Nepal. And then with children, it was like, there was a lot of black and white illustrations. People did not invest in it. It's also like, before, children didn't even need to read or watch TV. It's now that we have a necessity for it, because before, even when I was growing up, I mean, there were a few storybooks I read. I used to be out in the garden or on the streets all the time, but now that we are at home, I think that also increases the need for development, because there's no space for kids to actually play and imagine things anymore. So then there is that need, and that's why there is a demand also. I think there's also demand from the people, and from I've had a few parents write to me and all that stuff, saying that, oh, it's great that you're doing this work. Our children love your books, and we want to have more, because it's really hard to find good stories that are not like educative or forcing education on kids. Like, they want more imaginative Nepali stories. So there's this demand that's increasing right now, and I think room to play room to read had a vital role to play in this, because they were encouraging reading, and because they couldn't find all this great, like, they would find books, but then there would be grammatical errors or editing errors, and the images were, as I understand, not inspiring for children to pick up a book. When they started printing their color books, as I understand, it actually affected the market, and a lot of publishers suddenly popped up, like everybody wanted to do things. And now we have Asia Foundation who's taken over that step. So yeah.
So it looks like things are changing a lot for artists also in terms of how their work is being marketed. Can an artist in Nepal now, or illustrator, but also artists in general, can they hope to make a living out of doing art?
I cannot say now, because now it's kind of like an unpredictable situation. It's like, I cannot say now. Before COVID-19, yes, I would have said if you work hard and if you create new things, you could have. But right now, I cannot guarantee that. I just can't. There is no way of saying whether you will or not. I think with every discipline, it's like that.
So we have a question for you. I will take that question and then we'll move on with the conversation. This is from Nisha Karki, and she's asking, do you feel compelled to keep your own style away from commissioned work or not?
So the thing is, I'm very versatile. So when I started off as an illustrator and an artist, I actually had to do different works for different people. And back then, I would say Nepal, Kathmandu, people wanted different works. So you had to be very versatile, very skilled, versatile. Whereas the trend abroad was like, if you have a unique style, then everybody recognizes your work. So my actually biggest asset is that I'm super versatile. I think now I've developed sort of a style that I do for other works, but then when it comes to my own work, like the Eti and the Kali, then yes, I specifically reserve it for myself. I'm a bit selfish in that sense.
So does that mean you also create for yourself, like just for yourself?
Yes. So like Kali and the Eti are actually just for me. They are
Just
not for
you.
anybody else. I
So
mean, I want to publish them for the public, but
this is something you're doing for yourself. So I was talking to Vandana about your work, and because I'm somebody who doesn't know much about art, and so I was telling her, I find your work very different. Like most of the time, I feel like I find it easier to identify some artists when I see a piece of work. If I'm familiar with the artist, and I'll think maybe, okay, this is work by Palna. But when I look at your work, I feel like everything you've created is so different. You have these stuff that look like stuff I see on CBBS, like the cartoonish stuff, and then you also have the playful Kali, and then you also have some really dark stuff, but then you also have self-love where you're creating different versions of yourself. You also have work that sort of, I don't know, remind me of the Mithila art. So I was just wondering, as an artist, what have been your influences, and what went into creating Promina the artist?
I would say that comics were one of my biggest influences. So Asterix, Obelix, and then there is, which a lot of people might know. And then there is this comic called Franca by Henk Kuppers. It's I think it's a Dutch comic. So Franca is basically this individual woman who's like does investigations, and then there's this storybook that belongs to my sister. It's Russian folktales. So there's like, those are the basic things that like came behind my illustration style, because of it was beautiful and how it's created and all that stuff. And then With bigger artists, I think Dali is my favorite. So he influenced me a lot, and Van Gogh. So those two are actually, especially Dali and Van Gogh is like, and then I got exposed to Muka and Munch and all these other artists. So, I mean, they affect you a lot, but then when it's also growing up here, you see all this art and culture and you imagine things and you see things. And then when I went to Loksar, I think that was one of my biggest, bang on the head, and my just lights went out, and I decided, that's something I would like to aspire to. So, yeah.
Is there a term for what you're creating? Like if we had to use a term?
Illustrations? I don't know. It's just comics. It's just
Okay.
illustrations.
So the term illustrations bring me to this. So, and I don't know, it could be a debatable topic, but I was just thinking this is something I have thought about, and I'll probably ask Promina about this. So I hear this between writers and illustrators. Like when a writer hands her or his work to an illustrator, they feel like it's their prerogative to have control of the narrative, and they seem to think that the illustrator only comes in to sort of complement whatever they have created, and has to create in terms of how the writer is thinking of this piece of writing. But I've also heard the other side of the narrative, where the illustrator is saying, since I am creating, I should have the right to create my own version of the narrative, or tell the story the way I understand it. So where does this take us? Like, so who should have control of the narrative, or how should a writer and an illustrator work together?
So I think collaboration is the best, unless you're commissioning and you want specific things, that's a different thing. But then when you want your work to be like something that you're proud of and something that, you're happy about, I think collaboration works very well. And the input of the illustrator is important, but of course the text, like, it depends what came first. Is it the text or the visual? Like you asked me before, I do with visuals and then go into text. So the author does have a prerogative to, like, say this and this is what I want, and this is like how I would like it to be. However, it is also the prerogative of the artist to create what they think is best, because they want the work to be appealing, and they want the work to be self-explanatory in terms of the text. So visual also helps, like, the text to become more give it more clarity. And then I think it should be a balance between the both. I actually was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently, who was talking about this, and the person was very upset that, like, yes, the person was commissioned for a piece of work, and then it was just like, suddenly the copyright is not the person's copyright, which is also something that's a problem in Nepal. Like, I was also discussing this with
So
the
then
Asia.
whose copyright is it after?
So this is what I was discussing with the Asia Foundation, was that in Nepal, usually, like, as a book illustrator, you usually get commissions and you get no royalties. And usually publishers pay off the authors, and most publications actually do give royalties to the writer, but like in children's books, illustrators don't get royalties. We just get like commissions, and that's it. And they will, like, we get like honorable mentions, but there is no like royalties, or like in the future if they republish it 1,000 times, 100 times, there's nothing. So we were discussing that, and we were saying that even from the Asia Foundation and amongst my friends, is that it would be nice if this rule would change and you would get equal partnership. It's because a children's book works fantastic because of the illustrator and the text. It's not a single person. And that is something that we still need to work on. That is something that not a lot of publishers offer, actually. So yeah. And like, for example, recently someone approached me about doing a comic book. So they've written this fantastic text. It's an amazing adventure and all. And then I was asking, like, if the person would be willing to share the glory or the fame with the illustrator, because it's 50-50. A comic book is really hard to make. And then the person's like, no, it's just me, only my name and can go on it. And I gave an example of Asterix and Obelix, where you have Underzo and Goscinny, and both of them are equally important. So yeah, that's something
Yeah.
we still, some places, some publishers do have that where they do respect both, but a lot of them still don't see that it's important. So yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up, actually, because I've always wondered how artists get paid when there's a collaborative work where there's equal text and equal illustrations, and I wasn't aware. So you've done a lot of research work, right? So you've done academic writing, but you've also done this other kind of lighter, more fun storytelling kind of writing. Which one do you enjoy more? Oh, what's your strength? Which one of them?
So research writing is kind of fun for me, and it's very different from writing a story for kids or for young adults. It's very different because research writing, you have the facts and then you just like mention the facts and then you throw in a theory or two, you know. It's about creating a theory in your head and then saying that, oh, I have this theory, so this is what it sounds like, you know, maybe it is like that. And it's always open for debate and things always change up. That's what research is about. Research is not it's not like in science where you have facts and that's it. There's no changing. In arts, in social sciences, in politics, everything keeps changing. So you always have these debates and new ideas that come out. So that's what I enjoy, creating, you know, this dialogue about things that we are doing. But when you did mention that I used to write this lighter stuff. Yes, I used to write it before. And then for some reason I stopped. I'm trying to get back into it. But now I'm trying to merge it with my artwork so that I can actually do it for young children and young adults. I hope to like create these narratives that inspire them.
Okay. I'm just also sort of doing my timekeeping. So Promina, okay, I'm a very big fan of how women work together, and also a very big fan of women supporting each other in the work that they do. And when I saw this comic, where the only one I've seen is the one on self-love, but it really struck me as such an interesting project because there are these women collaborating, working around the same theme, right? And I feel like I wish more professions had, you know, something like that where women inspire each other, work together. Can we go into that? How do you you're mentoring, right, other artists as well? So how does that mentorship work, and how do you envision like the future of the art profession for other women who are also doing this, like younger women?
So I think one of the biggest struggles I had when I was coming up as an artist, which is what influenced everything that I do, is that though I had some guidance, there were people like Abindai and a few others who encouraged me in the sense that, like, you know, maybe you should try this and that. There was no real mentorship back then. There were very few artists as well, like women illustrators and so forth. So it was kind of a struggle. So now, like with Virangana, like you said, the 8 women artists that came up, it was also that we were creating heroines from the British Council. Like we were an alumni that started it off. And the idea was actually to open it to everybody, not just women. So because we were grantees, like our first 2 issues are actually grant money, so we have to pay the artists and for printing and all that stuff. We have limited amount of how many people we can actually support through it. So we only have women for the first 2 issue, and the second issue will be out maybe this month or next. It's called Vansagar. But then we hope to open up. So the idea is
So it's no longer going to be just women in the future.
yes, it's open for anybody. Not anybody, of course, we will like have to approach first because we're still starting out. But then the thing about mentorship and all that stuff, I think one of the biggest thing that drove me to teaching and guiding was that I wanted a little competition. Like healthy competition comes if somebody is challenging your working style, which is actually good because now I look at it like there's a lot of healthy competition and everybody wants to do better work. It's no longer like, oh, kam chalao, it's no longer that. It's literally you have a lot of
You've
artistic
upped your game.
yeah, which ups our game and which makes us need to be like up to date and, you know, everything. And I enjoy mentoring because I did not have that. Like there was nobody literally teaching me how to use Photoshop or nobody teaching me how to draw. I had to go for classes, and then somebody would always advise, oh, why don't you do this and this? But then everything else I had to do my own. Whereas I think that because I lack that, I have this tendency to, like, if anybody approaches me, I'll be like, yeah, sure, why don't I help you out and I guide you? And, you know, because it's also about community. I also want to create a community for illustrators and comic artists because I think it is important because a lot of like people who are starting out, and even established people, they don't know what the rates are, they don't know how to use a specific software, so maybe connect them with somebody else. I think collaboration works when you remove the ego and don't think about it, oh, Leo, but you think about it, it's healthy competition, we can grow together with it, rather than like, oh no, I should hold it to myself.
That's a
So I
great way
think
of
like
looking
even
at
with,
it.
because I think even with writers and any other form of arts, I mean, when you look at the social sciences or the scientist community, they all share, and that's how sciences and social sciences has reached so far, right? But here I think that we lack that a bit. I mean, it's starting to develop, and you have like the photographers that come together, you now have artists that come together, and like even us illustrators and all this stuff coming together. But I think we need more of it, we need to encourage more of it, and I think we need to remove this thing that we have. I mean, I respect my seniors, I have nothing against them, and I respect my juniors, but I think saying that somebody, just because somebody is older or more educated, doesn't necessarily that they are more knowledgeable. You also have to go with your gut instinct, and you have to go with what's right, kind of a thing. So and especially remove the ego, like that should go out the window. And I think that works with women much better, because women have more, we create sisterhood sort of, like, rather than, I don't know how it works for men, because I'm not a man, but yeah. I think amongst us, especially in Virangana, it's created sort of a sisterhood, and
I think that's great. I mean, I just feel like that's exemplary, and maybe could be emulated by other professions. I mean, at least when speaking for myself, like you said, I didn't really have a mentor, a female mentor as a journalist, and I did have male mentors, but not a female mentor. And even when I did, I think when I did seek mentorship, I sort of felt rejected, and I think it was coming from a place of feeling competition, but not in a healthy way. And I feel that if we are really thinking of feminism, and if we are thinking of creating a more egalitarian, right, world in terms of profession, also as in terms of other things, I think it's important to get rid of that ego and support each other. So do you think, Promina, that art can be agency for Nepali women in terms of representation?
Yes, I think any form of art can be a representation for women, men, anybody. I don't want to just talk about women, but yes, of course, we're talking about women. It can be an agency, it can be a tool, it can be used to tell our own stories, it can be used to tell other people's stories, it can be used to create awareness, it can be used to, create an debate or an argument, like I would say healthy debate. Like it can be used to point out what is an issue in a society or what is great about the society, so art works in so many ways, like everything around us, even a chair design, a computer. I mean, we say that art doesn't exist, it's not important, but it actually is quite important. Without designers, we would not have any of these things. They would be like, maybe they would be in such a way that we'd constantly fall off a chair. So art is important, and it does give agency. I can't hear you.
Gone.
So yeah, so art gives agency. So like even with Virangana, it gave agency about, yes, we need to love ourselves. Like for example, you mentioned concern. So in the first issue, she talks about how her mother's death affected her and how she dealt with it. In the second issue, I have a comic on, so our second issue is called Bhansaghar, where I talk about how I dealt with my mother's death, but then it's very different from hers. So mine is about, like when it comes out, you will see that I'm haunted by ghosts, I become a mess, and then I suddenly clean up, and then there's this happiness that comes out. It's very metaphorical in that sense. So in a way, it gives agency for ourselves, our self-expression. It gives agency to just communicate and get people talking about things. Recently I made these medical comics on breast cancer and the uterine prolapse, things that I didn't know. So I had to research it and talk to doctors. And I was like, this was actually made for women who do not know how to read. So visually it explains things for them. And I was like, when it happened, I got a lot of, great reviews, not just here, but even from my friends abroad. And I was like, that's really great. It's like giving agency for even a medical issue for women who don't have access to medicine to be aware of, like, okay, this can happen to me. this is what I should do maybe, or maybe I should be aware of this. So yeah, agency is there not just like for the self, but it can be for a community, it can be for women as a whole. So yeah, I think more stories should come out. And for example, last time there was this dignity without something and Carlo collaboration where they did this whole thing on menstruation, which was fantastic. It's about women just drawing about menstruation, be like, half the population is women. It's here. Just deal with it. You know, don't make us feel ashamed.
Yeah. Do you think women artists or writers like end up putting out like too much self-narrative out there? Like, given the kind of themes that we've seen, you know, it just seems like. Do you think that there's a lot of
I'm not
self-narrative or
sure
confessional?
I'm not sure because I've only seen it. I'm more aware about Nepal right now than I'm about other places. But I think most people, I'm not talking about the artists here, like, but for example, there is Nicola Streeton, who we worked with in the British Council, for example. She started her work with the trauma of a son's death. And then another friend of mine also started talking about herself rather than because they were dealing with something or, you know, so yes, maybe women's narratives come more from I wouldn't call it the domestic, but from their own perspectives, because there is not enough literature on it. And it's also, there's nothing to connect it to. Like, for example, I suffer with anxieties and there is not enough comics to talk about anxieties. There's always this, oh, when you have a panic attack and anxieties, you do this and this, but there is nothing enough about it. You know, there's no comics or no literature that will help me get through it in my context being within Nepal. So I think, yes, we do
And you
tend
have
to
created
maybe.
work around that, right?
I did one work in 2011 on depression. So yeah, 2010, 2011 on depression. So yeah.
Prina has one as well. I remember seeing this comic book by
Teacup in a
Prina.
Storm. So I
Yeah,
actually wrote,
yeah,
yeah, I mentioned it
yeah,
in my
a long time
paper.
ago.
Yes. So like we've all addressed it because maybe also when we, both of us were addressing it back then, things were also not openly talked about, like mental health wasn't openly talked about and things like that. Now everybody I meet is like, yes, I have anxieties.
Yeah.
Yes, I have panic attacks. Maybe I suffer from bipolarism. So it's becoming talked about, and there are a lot more people who can actually help us. Not that they were not there before, but then it's also a cultural thing that affects how we express it. So yeah.
But seeing something like that, the way it helps anyone is, I'm sorry, that's my dog, but okay,
It's
I can't
okay.
do anything about that, but I'm just going to keep talking. So the way it helped me was when I saw Prina's work, I thought, okay, so there is someone else who feels similarly.
I think it has to do with being able to connect. Like you said, it's, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who feels that way. I'm not the only one who has, you know, depression. There are other people also. And it helps us connect. It helps us to maybe self-reflect, see ourselves in a story and be like, oh yeah, somebody's talking about it. And then it becomes something that someone like me picks up and talks about in a research paper, but it becomes something that people remember also. So yeah, I think it's about connection. It's about relating to someone. So yeah.
I'm really sorry, but I'm being rudely interrupted by my dog here, but we've also run out of time for our conversation. I do have a lot of other questions that I really wanted to ask you, Promina, but I feel like this is like the alarm sounding for me. Yeah, I feel like let's just keep talking about this and we can do more talking. Also, I mean, I think in public spaces, but also, yeah, more on a personal level as well. And yeah, I'm going to just take this moment to thank you on behalf of, I'm really sorry about my dog, but oh, this is embarrassing. Okay, she has to pick a time to do this. Okay, so I'm going to thank you on behalf of the Sunday Sessions team. Shafali, Vishal, Suvani, Pranab, thank you very much for joining us here today.